be out there in the community.
So I'm going to start off
I want to add my thanks for everyone being here, and also my thanks for the KI Echo Center being so welcoming to our new doctoral program at School of Education at IUPUI, where you've heard several of the students here. We're in our second cohort, and we're picking our third cohort right now. We've been developing this collaborative relationship with KI Echo Center so that our students get integrated with the idea that the university should not be separate from the communities it serves, and that we should be working in a collaborative way in whatever research that we're doing, rather than the university deciding what research is appropriate. And that's the basis of the relationship we've had here. Khalil and Paulette, Imhotep, and all the other folks that work here have been very welcoming to us in that collaboration. Today I'm going to just say a few things about the book, and then I'm going to turn it over to these two young men, and they're going to get into it. The research that's covered, and there's a lot of research covered in the new Jim Crow. She didn't, Michelle Alexander, she didn't do that research. What she did is collected the research. So what she's talking about isn't her own work, and what she's talking about has been talked about by a lot of other people. The thing that's different about the book is I think she put it together in a very compelling way. I think when she started working, I believe she's a lawyer and a professor, and when she started working with these issues around law enforcement, imprisonment, and African American men, she didn't have the view that she currently has. You know, she had kind of the typical view of that we hear in society in general, that it's but as she began to work with this issue and she began to read more research, she realized that something else was going on here. And that, for example, white folks and black folks use drugs at about the same rate. There's plenty of research on that. But it's African Americans, and particularly African American males, who are targeted by law enforcement at huge rates. I mean, we have one of the highest prison rates in the world. And most of that, the increase that's happened over the last few decades, has been focused on African American males. That's where we got our huge increase. And it's around drug enforcement, and most of it's around marijuana. And even though marijuana use itself is a little higher among the white population, but they're not getting targeted. So many people think that all this started with the crack epidemic, and it didn't. It started before the crack epidemic. And it was driven by the discomfort of conservative forces in this country with the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was starting to change the nature of relationships among whites and folks of color, and people with investment in the status quo started to get very nervous and were looking for ways to, in a sense, reestablish Jim Crow, because they were losing it. And Jim Crow was of economic benefit to whites in power. And so, you know, they tried several things, but the one that really worked was this focus on the dangerous black male, the unlawful black male, and they started instigating different government programs. They were able to sell that idea beyond conservatives, till now it's kind of socially accepted. But she looks into all of this and shows that this has nothing to do with any problem with black males. This has to do with white racism, white supremacy, the economic dominance of whites. And she does all this in a very compelling, It's a really thorough, well-researched book. But all that's abstract, you know, and so I'm now going to turn it over to these two young men here who are living amidst this themselves. Go ahead, y'all.
Well, my name is Russell Palmer. I'm the intern to Calico Center. I'm 17 years old. And first off, well, I'm going to let my friend introduce yourself first.
I'm going to go ahead and continue.
First off here, I'm going to talk about a blog I created based off reading this book called Jim Crow. It's named The New and Old Jim Crow and What's the Difference. It's a compare and contrast essay I created through an assignment. So I'm just going to read it off to you here. Okay. I'm going to explain the tenets and the similarities and the difference between the new and old Jim Crow. Okay, first I talk about the old Jim Crow, the tenets of the old Jim Crow. The old Jim Crow was a racial caste system that was used in the United States, largely in the southern regions, like Texas, Mississippi, Kentucky, all the southern regions, during the 1870s. Under this system, African Americans were given second-class status by laws that directly and indirectly stripped the black African Americans, particularly males, of their rights. Jim Crow was rationalized by the belief that whites were superior to blacks in every way, and that Jim Crow laws were needed for both whites and blacks' own good. Jim Crow encouraged violence to maintain the racial hierarchy and the social etiquette that kept blacks in the second class. And the tenets of the new Jim Crow are: the new Jim Crow creates an anti-black undercast. The new Jim Crow creates a black undercast through the United States criminal justice system. Since the 1970s, war on drugs, discriminatory laws, and police practices have caused the prison population to grow exponentially, targeting African American males in particular. Once a person is branded a criminal, they lose most of their rights. The new Jim Crow makes it legal for businesses to discriminate against ex-convicts when applying for employment, housing, or food stamps. By losing such basic rights, the person is thrown into a second-class status for the rest of their life. The similarities. Both the new and old Jim Crow were made to create a second class within the United States. The main victims targeted by the new and old Jim Crow are mainly black. Both use fear and violence and imprisonment as a means to keep control of the undercast and takes away rights and property. Jim Crow uses laws to legitimize and impose white supremacy on society. The main purpose of the Jim Crow is to concentrate the money and power in the predominantly white middle class and elite classes. The main differences between the old and new Jim Crow are the ways to achieve their goal. The methods of the old Jim Crow were more explicit, involving outright attacks on African Americans without covering up racist attitudes. Individuals and groups who spoke out against Jim Crow were threatened, lynched, and murdered to keep the system running. The methods of the new Jim Crow, however, are more discreet and pervasive, fueled by racial stereotypes. And there is little political opposition to the system of mass incarceration, and political leaders deliver messages celebrating racial equality, while they're not truthfully doing so. The conclusion: the new and old Jim Crow were made to maintain the control of the elite over the blacks and lower classes. The old Jim Crow is obsolete in today's age of colorblindness, and new Jim Crow is an evolved form to thrive in today's realities. It's a Kepler, say Kepler.org. You can go to media and go through blogs, and she'll be the most recent one you see.
Is your reference the new Jim Crow book, and/or is this your interpretation and your conclusion based on your research?
The old Jim Crow was from the book and from personal research I did to get a better understanding. Because
Other sources?
Yeah, she spoke briefly about the old Jim Crow, so I got some more research on that. The new Jim Crow was mainly for reading the book. Before I answer my questions, I would like to talk about my visit to Purdue. My visit to Purdue gave me a reinforced and stronger understanding about the person who wrote this book, Michelle Alexander, because when she spoke in the discussion at Purdue, she showed very personal passion and understanding and belief about what she wrote about. But like, you can't tell her that she's wrong. You just can't come up to her with that.
You saw her at Purdue? You saw her speaking? It's cool. It's really cool.
Okay. And now I'm just going to pass it to my friend Keenan over here.
Thank you very much. My name is Keenan Rhodes. I'm an intern for the KI Echo Center. Long-time intern. I originally came here, and I've known Imhotep and Miss Paulette since I was about 7, and remember running around at the Rehab Resource Center when where they used to work. And so I came back this summer because I finally had a grip, or somewhat of an understanding of what they were trying to do for the community. And so I wanted to come and give back, and do whatever I could to support this initiative. And so, well, now that's evolved to me staying at the dorm. So, I mean, it's quite an experience, still being a senior in high school and managing it too, but it's been great so far. And so, I also wrote a blog, like Russell, and mine was more of a self-reflection, so I'll just go ahead and read it. For the past month, I've been reading The New Jim Crow, a book by Michelle Alexander about the system of oppression that imprisons disproportionate numbers of African American men and converts them into second-class citizens upon release. This book discusses this system by explaining the complexity of the racism of the legal system. As a young black man, reading this book has been unsettling. Alexander's collection of facts and statistics clearly reveal racism that I thought had subsided. The New Jim Crow has made me realize that I've been wearing blindfolders that blurred my vision of institutionalized racism, a system of written and unwritten laws, unspoken rules, and social norms that target me, my family, and my community. Institutionalized racism reinforces white privilege, keeping whites at the top at the expense of blacks and other people of color. Though racism takes a different form than in my grandparents' days, through this book, I've discovered that it takes another form that is prevalent in our society through microaggressions and the threat of being arrested because of discriminatory laws and police practices. One of the most disheartening stories that I've heard from this book about the insensitivity of the legal system and the power it gives to its enforcers was the story of Amadou Diallo. In February 1999, Diallo was a 23-year-old African-American living in New York City. Police surrounded him outside of his apartment. He took his wallet out of his jacket, which the police mistook for a gun. They fired 41 shots at him. It hit him 19 times. And all officers involved in the shooting were acquitted and faced no charges. This tragedy shows the danger that we face. The fact that a black man can be brutally murdered by authority and without significant ramifications is alarming and is very alarming. The story was worldwide at the time it occurred, but I was never told about it in school books, and most people my age have no idea that it happened. Now I walk around with a fear when I'm walking down the street that someone will view me as dangerous and try to hurt me. I experienced a similar fear at Park Tudor, an elite private school, where I feel the need to dress and act a certain way so that I don't appear as a threat to my white classmates and teachers. One of the worst realizations that I've had is the impact that this system has had on my thoughts. This includes the way that I speak to people, and including the way that I communicate with my family, and also the way I view my own people. Following this discovery comes the question of what we need to do about it. One of the first steps is to have discussions about this complex racism. And other steps includes building organized resistance against this system so that we can build a world that is humane and just for all people. Thank you. Thursday, when Rasul M., Ms. Fair, Pambana, and I went to Purdue to visit Michelle Alexander, I guess the main thing that I took from it, well, the impact that it gave me was that it put a voice behind the words. And so I wasn't reading a collection of, I wasn't just reading a collection of facts. It put the passion into the book, which gave it a different feel for me. In a field that was much more impactful. And so, I guess now we'll transition into the actual book itself. I'll be covering the introduction and a section of chapter 1, and Russell will finish off the chapter. And so, the introduction begins with the story of a man named Jarvis Cotton. She begins with this young man because he is a felon. An example of the new the new undercast system. During the days of Jim Crow, his great-great-great-grandfather could not vote. And so now, all of these years later, you still see that those same rights of being a citizen have been stripped. But now the label is no longer, the label that you get is no longer the same. The label is now being a felon, being a supposed criminal. So she continues, well, that's the way she starts the introduction. She continues with her own story of how she got started, or how her awakening came about, which was one day she was taking the bus and she saw an orange sign that said, "The war on drugs is the new Jim Crow." And so seeing that sign kind of enacted her to learn more about what she just saw. So she started to gather a little bit more research on it to further expand upon these thoughts that to further expand upon what she saw. And she came to that conclusion that yes, the sign was right. The war on drugs and the criminal justice system is the new Jim Crow. And one of the ironic things is that it was, well, not necessarily ironic, but that this war on drugs was established after the Civil Rights Movement. And so it was a way that you could continue to discriminate against people. Now, of course, the war on drugs was created, it's supposedly colorblind. However, the focus that it took was on poor black communities, and it targeted young African-American men. And so another thing that she mentions in the introduction is how the criminal justice system is being overlooked by black leaders. And so when asked about the intentions that all these black organizations are going to do, criminal justice was nowhere on the list. And so the fact that the criminal justice system is being overlooked by black leaders, it further perpetuates the idea that we are blind to this system. And so She then proceeds to talk about how she's the splitting up of the book. Chapter 1, exploring the racial caste system of the new Jim Crow and the systematic control of black people. Chapter 2, dealing with the war on drugs. Chapter 3, how the colorblindness of the laws, although the laws themselves are colorblind, how they're enforced has a racial bias towards them. With Chapter 4 being how the caste system operates upon release from prison. Chapter 5, with the comparison between mass incarceration and Jim Crow. And Chapter 6, what acknowledging the presence of the new Jim Crow means for our society. So, Chapter 1, okay, so, my apologies, I have a little bit of technology problem. But Chapter 1 basically begins by explaining the system of slavery in this country. And so she explains that slavery in itself was the caste system, with African slaves doing all the work and being less than human, being treated as property, and being treated as animals. And so then she continues on and talks about the time after 1770, when we became our own country, and how the Constitution itself was written so that it can continually justify the system of slavery. And so, slavery was very profitable, and it fueled the economy of the United States. And so, around 1860, the Civil War began, in response to, of course, the abolitionist movement, the slave revolts, and the persistence of the North trying to get rid of slavery in the entire country, and the South resisting that because of all of its benefits. And upon release, if you release all the slaves, then they become equal citizens, which is what we saw for a brief period of time after the Civil War ended. And so then she continues with saying that the Jim Crow system was created in response to the freedom of all of these slaves who now had supposed equal rights, who were socially equal to all of the whites. And so Jim Crow was a way that they could continually control African American citizens in every aspect of life. And so then she continues on to talking about the segregation laws and how they continuously affected the citizens, and thus around 1940s, 1950s, the death of the Jim Crow laws, which Russell here will talk about.
Okay. After the Jim Crow reached its peak, many civil rights and black activists, such as Martin Luther King and others, etc., as civil rights movement was starting to go from a racial issue to a socio-economic issue that would cross racial borderlines and appeal to many other type of classes and races, the racial attitude towards blacks was starting to dissipate, and Jim Crow's power to keep the civil rights movement progressing was starting to lose its hold, as it was starting to move from just appealing to African Americans by going for civil rights was going towards, instead of aiming directly as race as the main issue, it was aiming at social or economic issues primarily. So it was appealing to more than just from black African American poor class. It was also appealing to low white working class. So it was gaining more support politically through white working class people and was starting to expand its power. And through that, the Jim Crow was starting to lose its hold and its reasoning by using racial attitudes as its means to keep control. Since more and more white and more of the white population was starting to go and support the going to support the civil rights movement. So the also for the census for the Republican Party also, and the federal support, the death of Jim Crow was inevitable in his end. Starting from that, the birth of mass incarceration. After a few decades of the loss of Jim Crow, many Southern Democrats and police officers down in the South was trying to put a new face on the civil rights movement as the reason for the increase in crime rates in the United States. They were trying to give it a new face, trying to make it seem like that's a problem. And through doing so, many white Democratic conservatives and politicals were starting to build this new rhetoric, new type of language to put on this political party. Since they knew that explicit racial attitudes and let me rephrase that. They knew the old Jim Crow was dead. They could not bring it back. They were trying to find a new way to keep the status quo in the same place as it was before and keep it stable without using the old methods used before. So they knew the old rhetoric of racial attitudes as saying black African Americans through unrational type of means was not going to cut anymore. So through political means, they started using crime, implicit type of words to put on African Americans or the civil rights movement as a reason for increased crime rates within the United States. Through doing so, many Democratic politicals started grinding a hole through the political progress of the civil rights movement. Okay. After a couple years, and the beginning of the Great Depression, it helped exacerbate that issue. The Great Depression created a new realignment of political parties in the United States. During that time, during the Great Depression, thanks to Franklin D. Roosevelt, the New Deal programs, which appealed to African Americans as well as the lower white class whites in the North and the South who was affected by the Great Depression. And the Democratic Party saw this as an opportunity to gain support from both. They needed to support white and black to help move the political agenda. But still, a lot of white working classes and elites did not did not like that. Their political party they worked so hard to support was changing this type of ideological view in the entire scenario. So the Republicans saw this as an opportunity to gain a new majority for the political party since they were the minority. So as time went on, the political party, the Republicans, when Nixon in the 1920s and 1960s, the Nixon administration and so forth, saw this opportunity to create a new party. So they still bid on this. They still built on the idea of crime. They didn't lose. Excuse me, I'm trying to get my words together. There's a lot here. There's a lot. They went from desegregation, which was the hot topic right then, desegregation, busing, economic. They moved all the way from that, all the equality and social issues, to law and order. As crime rates were starting to still increase within the United States across the board, the Republicans saw this as an opportunity to gain a new majority through the United States by appealing to the elite and lower white classes who feared and hated the new political ideas that civil rights was starting to make. So at first, the Nixon administration started this order campaign by using the mass media and speeches, etc., to show this image of not just blacks, but a lot of ethnic groups as the reason for the major crime increase in the United States, and incarceration increase. Sorry, it's just a lot to put out there. So through the Nixon administration, through the mass media, Nixon's main advisor saw Nixon's idea based on this. He put this in paraphrasing. He paraphrased Nixon's idea. No matter how you look at this, the African Americans or blacks are the main issue here. So he used this opportunity to appeal to the lower working class whites by showing mass media imagery, by ignoring or putting up laws that appeal to them. A lot of and one of the ideas he thought of is the new drugs, the drug war. A new drug war that was started mainly in the 1971 to 1973, when he was still president. Nixon started this new drug on marijuana, which was starting to pop up thanks to the baby boom incident, where a new generation of 23-year-olds, etc., 23-year-olds, youth, and young people starting to pop up. He used this opportunity through the huge increase for generation gap and new upheaval of new drug to move his political agenda by pointing out this new drug issue and using African Americans or any other low ethnic group as the main image of this drug issue. After that, Jimmy Carter, a lot of researchers and other political parties tried to show him that marijuana, decriminalizing marijuana would be beneficial in this drug issue to help mitigate this drug issue. He ignored all their appeals or proposals. Get got nervous.
Take your time, Shirley. You go with it.
Thanks.
Take your time.
Afterwards, Jimmy Carter was also a person who was trying to. By the time Jimmy Carter was in office, 11 states decriminalized marijuana because he knew it wasn't a big problem as much was. So, Jimmy Carter was trying to do. Jimmy Carter didn't really do too much actually. He didn't even do too much different than what Nixon was doing. He just followed the same boat as stay in his office. When Ronald Reagan got into office, that's when everything went off the board. Everything skyrocketed when Ronald Reagan got into office. He poured millions, among billions of dollars into the drug war, adding new drugs like crack cocaine into the scenario. Ronald Reagan was offering money, so this new drug war was giving federal money to states and community police departments to find and arrest drug offenders. And this new law, new legislations dictated that first-time drug offenders would get a lifetime sentence in prison. Prior to that, it was just a year's worth, 1 year for a drug offense. Thank you. This is a lot here.
Okay.
Ronald Reagan got in office, everything went off the board. He started doing the same thing that Nixon does along that line. He just went for it tenfold. Started throwing billions of dollars into mass media imagery and the federal uses, using the military ties in the drug war. Through the mass media, he showed images of African Americans as drug addicts, drug babies, mothers being drug addicts as well. Mainly using African Americans as an image to give a new stereotype to drug war for his political agenda. For doing so, and through throwing more and more funding into state and state police and government police, mass incarceration skyrocketed as the African Americans as the main target. And also for efforts of the civil rights movement to go against this, he threw more imagery as some civil rights activists as trying to lighten up the laws against drug offenders. So the idea of more tough laws started, this theme of tough laws started to occur. As future presidents and so forth started the idea of throwing more and more tougher laws onto drug offenders by longer sentences, more punishment, and more laws and basic rights being removed from doing so. And that's what I got, and that's I believe that's the end of chapter. I'm asking the chapter 1. Sorry for me doing that. I get I got excited.
So we'll open up for questions. Can you maybe serve as the facilitator of the questions? Pass the ball around to your colleagues there. And I'd like to encourage the audience to try to keep the commentary minimal and try to focus on asking questions and even some challenging questions to the young men, folks, and critical thinking and thought. So without any further ado, any questions?
Yes, Denise?
What benefits are obtained by the privileged class by oppressing folks under the old and or the new Jim Crow?
You want to answer that? Okay, sure.
I think yours will probably be best. Your blog kind of answered this.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Through the old Jim Crow, the beneficiaries, the middle elite class, the entire structure of the social and economic system required an undercast. The middle elite class was working and providing money for the upper elite class. That's how it went. But let me try to give you a better understanding. Through slavery, the lower working white classes rebelled against the elite classes during slavery. To prevent that, the elite classes pointed to slaves, African Americans, as the reasons for their troubles, to divert their attention from themselves. In the new Jim Crow, the entire theme is basically the same. Through making the middle elite class view African Americans as a problem, and the middle elite class views themselves as superior over themselves, it diverts attention from the elite classes who are the main power brokers of the entire system. So for Jim Crow, for the old Jim Crow, the Jim Crow laws was made to keep the African Americans in that inferior type of light through the middle class's eyes.
Why is it because there's not enough labor, not enough jobs? Is it totally economically based? Is it because they just don't like the way African Americans look? Why would that be happening?
African Americans were made, why would it happen? Why do middle class feel them that way, or why the elite class do that?
Why in general do societies oppress one group of folk? Why do they do it? Is it because they need the cheap labor? Is there because there's not enough jobs in the economy?
It's possibly a multitude of reasons, because I know the United States is not the only place that made an uncaste. Like India, for example, has its own caste system to do so. But the United States, I imagine, my understanding, caste systems are made to maintain a power system, a status quo to maintain a certain amount of power and control. Like a hierarchy. Certain amount of hierarchies have more control and influence over another. And the middle class was sort of the buffer between the elite class and the lower class. The elite, the lower African American class, from the get-go, were in charge doing the managerial labors back then, like in slavery, the old Jim Crow, were made to do things that middle elite class could not do. The middle elite class were made to do things, were made to work in like, I don't know how to answer that part, but the middle elite class were made to do their own thing. The elite class stood at the top of the pyramid by controlling where does the money and power go. That's what they usually did. It involved the elite class or the lower class. If there wasn't no African American class, who do you think would be the lower class? The middle class would be the lower class. because there's no other class. If that would be the case, the middle class would likely do the same thing African Americans have been trying to do for a long time. Trying to get the equal quo. Trying to stay equal with the elite class. And the one thing with the elite class, they don't want to be equal with you. That's been the main thing, regardless of what class you are. Stay where you are, I'll stay where I am. So they use these strategies to pit lower white class and African Americans, even though they were both broke at the same time back then, pit them against each other to divert attention from the middle elite class who are mainly in control to the day. By making elite class viewing the African Americans as lower, making them feel superior to stay where they are, and viewing African Americans as a problem if things change. Does that answer your question?
Great,
Great.
Good job.
Yeah, one type.
Reading this book, how does it make you feel as you're reading?
So, I guess we can. Do you want to answer that? I mean, we can both answer. But
I can answer first then.
you sure? I'll just take
Why
a
don't
minute.
you,
I'll let you take
why
a
don't both of you give us your thoughts on that? I mean,
Yeah,
both-
we will.
Well,
Just bickering about who goes first. But Russell, you guys,
Okay.
your throat's dry. I'll go
Um,
first.
Okay.
As far reading this book, it was, as I was talking about in my blog, it kind of opened my eyes as far as how deep racism goes. Well, I guess this one provided more of a clarification it provided a clarification for something that I felt I couldn't answer, that I couldn't put together myself. And so I always knew that there was something there, why am I no matter what I do, it seems like I'm always being looked at funny by particular groups of people, mainly people that I go to school with. And it seemed to be something that I just, that I always knew, but really couldn't put in words. And so what this book did for me was, it was kind of like a giant, aha, that's what I've been feeling this entire time. Now it's right in front of me, and greatly composed, and very clear and thorough. So.
Can I ask you a question? So, since you read the book and still in the environment of the school you attend, how do you interact differently? How do you approach situations differently, or have things changed?
Well, one of the primary things I'm involved with at school is serving as kind of one of the presidents of the diversity club. And so, I mean, especially since reading this book, I've been making sure that we're trying to push more for, during these discussions, having more impact and pushing more for equity rather than equality. And so with equality, we were, as a club, we were doing a lot of equality work, which was, everyone's the same. But, although that would be a great place to get to, by saying that it ignores the power dynamics of race in America. And so we had to, that's one of the main things that I've been trying to do. And I had mentioned the book in my club, and of course, extra reading doesn't really get great reception among teenagers, but I've definitely been trying to push for a different message so that we can have a more profound impact on our school. All right, so Russell, you want to answer M's original question?
When I read the book, well, before I read the book, I've been working with Cal for like 4 years now, going on 5 years. I had a basic inkling that something general was wrong with everything around me. I knew something wrong. So I knew there was probably so obviously I assumed there was already something wrong with the justice system and everything else like that. But when I read the Jim Crow book, New Jim Crow, it gave me context and scale to have to look at what really is the problem. When I read how much this new Jim Crow is integrated into everything else in the United States and how vital it is, I was like, in terms of NAACP and any other type of organization trying to deal with certain type of issues, we're just picking at the toe of the entire problem. I was like, this is big. If we change one, if we do succeed changing one thing, it may mess up something else entirely.
Okay.
Like, for example, if we do end up changing mass incarceration and dealing with the entire unequal incarceration rates in the United States, and incarceration goes down, millions of people are going to lose their jobs, more than they are now. And a lot of money is going to be lost, too. Mass incarceration building jails is one of the United States' main source of making money.
It is.
So if that goes away, the United States is going to have to find a new thing to do. So if we fix one problem, there's going to be new problems to deal with. So it's hard to get a grasp around this entire thing.
Amy, in the back.
I wonder this is a great example of, to me, don't you think that this is a great example of the power of synthesis and how it's really dangerous in our analysis culture to put ideas together. And the fact that she put those ideas together, it created something new that we could really put our hands around. Do you see that?
Ideas are dangerous to put ideas together. I think I got an idea because I believe the people who are managing the system thought of this as well. Because if you, like, the idea of abolishing racism terms and everything else from the judicial system, everybody else ignored the idea. But everybody has a hard time implying the idea that the justice system is racist. Trying to make an argument for it. By creating a regular, by separating the ideas of racism and justice, no one can put the entire picture together. That this entire justice system is discriminatory about who is going to be targeted. At least it's hard to argue for it.
All right, so go in order of hands. One, then Miss you, sir, then Miss Bambana, then
The lady in the orange jacket.
yes. So you first.
Kenny, you talked about microaggressions when you first started your presentation.
Oh, she was here last
And
night.
when you talked about the microaggressions, it struck me that it happens a lot in schools because you connected it to school. What do you think? What do you think we need to know more about in terms of what a microaggression is? What do you see it? What do you see it affecting?
See it affecting? Well,
What is it, and what do you see it affecting?
microaggressions are basically like small nuances that are like very offensive, but not to the. They usually represent stereotypes, but they're like tiny, small observances that turn into generalizations. So microaggressions being the small observances, and then stereotypes turning into these general observations. And so, I mean, I guess I could give an example of microaggressions would be with typical one of African American males. If we're at the lunch table and you see one of us eating fried chicken, then you know you have some of the white kids kind of look and point their fingers and kind of snicker, like, look, the African Americans are eating chicken again. like you know, like
That's
we're
funny, apparently.
as if it's as if we're like gazelles and this is National Geographic.
You don't need to make a message joke. Make it a good joke at least.
Yeah, it's like, and so, so how I see it affecting I would say that its impact turns into from shifting, is that shift from microaggressions to the stereotypes. And so when you have all these general observations about people in general, then you hold that generalization about every single person that you meet that may fit into that category. And so, especially with the stereotypes that we face, especially as African American, as Rasul being, both of us being young black males, the stereotypes that are against us are very heavy and are very dangerous. You know, the fact that we're black, you know, automatically, according to stereotypes, makes us criminals, makes us drug addicts, and people assume that we're automatically up to no good. So that's where I see the danger that lies in microaggressions. So, you said.
How old are you? Yeah.
17.
And how old are you?
17.
Okay. Twofold question. Are you able to communicate to other young people your age about this conversation? And two, what percentage of your generation is aware consciously as you are about this?
Well, trying my best to answer this question, first question. In terms of communicating this type of ideal ideology to other students, other people, I used to teach my other students in my school certain subjects, like system thinking and teaching thinking like that. So, I never teach anyone this yet. I can't imagine how you could teach someone this. So, in terms of difficulty, it may be difficult to teach someone else this, trying to explain someone else this, while trying to explain them other multitude of things to get a grasp of the type of situation they're in. Like the reason why, the reason behind all the instances they have in their lives, or may occur in their lives. Right? It's just hard to put into words how it is. In rational manner.
That conversation though.
Yeah, a conversation's probably the best thing to do. Like you can't like have a classroom and just teach someone of this verbatim.
I think what he's asking, do you and your peers talk about it?
Oh, no, not very often. I usually talk to older peers. He's about the only person my age I talk about this.
Thank you, brother.
I would definitely say, well, with the extracurricular activities that I'm involved with, I get a chance to talk about certain things outside, that are outside of schoolwork, such as being leader of the diversity club at school. This is one of the main things that I try to talk about. But I do notice that no matter how hard we try, and unless we're doing something fun or being celebratory within our practice, unless we're trying to have, if we're trying to have deep conversation, I noticed that that's when the room kind of loses, we lose attention, and so we lose, we lose the attention of all of our peers. But as far as the people that I communicate with, well, I mean, of course, I have friends from school, and then I also have long-term friends from people that I know in my neighborhood, and from childhood relationships. And then I also have, KI crew, which of course you'd expect we talk about this all the time. And so, so as far as kids in my school, I do talk to maybe 2 or 3 of them about it. There have been a couple that have stated their distaste for my conversation, so. Actually, one of them, the ones that I talk to that do, that can understand or at least trying to understand are black. And of course, that I talk to, there's like one white student that gets it, or that is trying to get it. But that's pretty much it. I mean, I try to talk to all my friends about it, and but there are only a few of them, you know, like 2 or 3, that are really trying to listen.
It's not a pretty subject.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's not.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Quick way to lose friends.
It's not a pretty subject.
So, said you might lose friends out.
I said it's a quick way to lose friends. I know.
My dad said
You know, you was talking about microaggressions affecting the image. I've noticed, you know, I was a photographer, and I know the f-stop and so forth can either lighten a picture or darken it. And I've noticed that all black fellas, they put pictures on there where their hair is standing out, and it's dark, you know what I'm saying? And many white women look at that. Now, I've been in my car driving my wife, and we stop at a stoplight. And a white woman might be next door, man, she reached to lock the door.
Yeah.
It's like I'm gonna jump out and jump on her. And so that image is being played all over by black people. And the black fella, his hair is never combed. I don't even know when they let him keep combed. I'm saying that image has been portrayed throughout our society. And people are frightened just by seeing me as old as I am on a stick. They're afraid. That image that the media portrays, you know, it does affect us, young and old. So that's...
You have a question you might ask them today?
No, no, of course not. That micro, she brought up micro when you spoken about, and I know that. It does affect us. The impression people get of you, you know.
All right. Oh, Ms. Pamela, go ahead.
I wanted to know, in Michelle's book, she talked about solutions. And I want to know what you think about her solutions, and if you have any thoughts about what needs to be done.
Good luck to you.
Thank you, Anna. Well, I hope, well, in part of the book, she explained that this book wasn't made to give a grand solution. But in the end, she does point out some possible solutions to discuss about. And one of the solutions I thought about is about removing this idea of colorblindness as the main idea of the solution. The idea of colorblindness. As trying to look over the idea of your skin color as a means of your character. But for what I read from the book, all this idea of colorblindness is give people indifference to your race and your identity. Make you completely ignorant about everything else about your character. You only be concerned about what's been portrayed about your character. So with that indifference, a person will not try to go any deeper to try to understand about your character about what they've been told. So one of the solutions I believe she stated was the idea of racial consciousness. Not being racist in a way, not being racist or prejudiced in a way, but being conscious of that person's race, aside from his character. Like, don't take your racist character as a generalization, but use it as a means to make a possible determination of what's going to happen around you. Like, what do you expect from this character? But not just an ignorant understanding of what you've been told. Like, I'm trying to give you an example.
You did very well.
Yeah.
Well, just breaking it down.
Yeah, I just want to give you an example to give you some context. Like Mr. Ramsey said about a person, that's the idea of an ignorant type of character, an ignorant person trying to give their character through an assumption they made from television. Like, they didn't get to know this person. They just made a general assumption about his character. Expect negative, very negative outcomes from him. Racial consciousness means you're going to take more than just what you've been told into account. Like, I know what, I assume certain things from this person, but you gotta be critical of what you think about it.
Amen.
Okay. So, a person like, I don't want to use him as an example. When I read that chapter, I thought of him. He's not a colorblind person. He usually takes race in his expectations a lot. Like dealing with a multitude of people. He has a generalization. It's not a generalization, it's just an assumption he makes that he takes into account. He doesn't base his action entirely on it. He lets the person take the action first and see if it was right or wrong, and try to make conditions beyond that. Most of the time, he's right. But yeah, that's my answer.
All right, as in order of hands, Ms. Fair first, and Ms.
I was going to remind you, young men, that she said, let us march to the hard work of movement building. She said civil rights is hard won, hard fought.
Mm-hmm.
Civil rights is empty without human rights.
That's right.
And then she started talking about the first step is telling the truth. Be bold and courageous. One young woman said, how do you affect the changes to human rights without militancy? And she said militancy is fun. If militancy, she says, I'm not one. She says, if militancy means violence, then I'm not there. She says, but don't water down the truth. If militancy means not compromising, when it's not even necessary. If militancy means courageously speaking out and speaking the truth, she says, please be militant. This was a young woman who stood up. And so it was about the hard work of movement building, and we all have that example. It was the building of the civil rights movement, that Martin Luther King got killed right after he went to Tennessee and was starting to organize the garbage workers. As soon as it started turning into human rights, he was gone. And so it was the hard work of movement building and telling the truth. Make visible what is hidden in plain sight.
All right. Ms. Rubin in the back, and then here up front.
I don't know, I'm sort of re-deliberating my question. Go ahead, anybody else?
All right, in your front.
My question actually does touch a little bit on what Ms. Paulette was saying about telling the truth and owning the story. Because one of the chapters